Alzira had lived alone for so many years that she could no longer remember when the silence had begun. The old apartment, on the third floor of a building forgotten by time, creaked at night as if it were breathing alongside her. The walls held yellowed photographs, heavy furniture, and a constant scent of cold coffee and memories. She woke every morning at exactly 6 o'clock, out of habit, not necessity. The radio stayed on low, more to deceive the emptiness than to listen to the news. Alzira told herself she liked that life. She said loneliness was a choice. She said many things, until the day the cat appeared. It was late afternoon when she noticed a grey blur crossing the kitchen. At first, she thought it was her imagination. Then she heard the dull sound of something falling to the floor. A saucer. When she turned her head, there he was, a thin cat with dirty grey fur, one eye permanently closed and the other watching everything with suspicion. He didn't look lost. He looked decided. Alzira stood still, leaning on her cane, waiting for the animal to run away. But the cat simply sat on the kitchen rug, wrapped his tail around his body, and blinked slowly, as if he had just come home. "No," she said, more surprised than firm. "Not here." The cat yawned. She tried clapping her hands to scare him off. Nothing. She tried nudging him with the tip of her cane. He dodged it, offended, and lay down again. He didn't meow, didn't attack, didn't ask for food. He simply stayed. Alzira sighed, too tired to win that strange battle. She prepared a simple meal, sat at the table, and pretended to ignore him. The cat ignored her right back. That night, while rain tapped against the windows and the building groaned under the wind, Alzira heard a new sound in the apartment, a low purring, distant, almost like an old engine running. She didn't smile, but she didn't send the cat away either. Without knowing it at that moment, two solitudes had just recognized each other. In the days that followed, the cat remained as if he had never had another place to go. Alzira began calling him Barto, not because the name fit, but because it sounded old, like everything in that home. He didn't respond to the name. He didn't respond to affection, to calls, or to attempts at conversation. He simply coexisted. Barto slept all day, always in unlikely places, inside the closet, on old newspapers, on top of the refrigerator. At night, he walked through the apartment in absolute silence, as if he knew every inch of that space long before arriving. Alzira pretended indifference, but something in her routine began to change. She started cooking a little earlier, so the food wouldn't spoil, left a small dish of water near the door, closed the window more carefully, because of the wind. Small adjustments that deep down had another reason. Barto watched everything with that single attentive eye. One afternoon, Alzira felt a different pain in her chest, not strong, strange. She sat slowly in her armchair, took a deep breath, and stared at the wall clock marking seconds with an irritating insistence. She thought about calling someone, but couldn't remember who. She didn't want to bother anyone. Barto jumped onto the table and knocked over an old picture frame. The glass shattered across the floor. "Just what I needed," she murmured, rising with difficulty. But as she bent down to pick up the shards, the dizziness returned. The world spun too fast. Alzira grabbed the table, closed her eyes, and stayed there, motionless, breathing shallowly. Barto didn't move away. He approached slowly, sniffed her hand, and let out a short, low meow, almost restrained. It wasn't a request for attention, it was a warning. Alzira straightened herself with effort, sat down again, and waited for the sensation to pass. When she opened her eyes, the cat was still there, staring at her, as if evaluating something important. "It's past," she said, more to herself than to him. Barto jumped down and walked away, but that night for the first time he slept beside her chair. Not touching, just close enough. Alzira noticed in the middle of the night when she woke to the low purring mixed with the ticking of the clock. She watched the cat in the dark and felt something strange in her chest. It wasn't pain, it was the fear, of being alone again. The rain began lightly that night, almost shy, but slowly gained strength, as if the sky had decided to insist. The wind rattled the old windows, making the building groan in familiar sounds. Even so, something felt different in the air, an unease, difficult to explain. She woke up thirsty. Slowly, leaning on her cane, she walked down the dark hallway toward the kitchen. The light was off. She didn't turn it on. She knew the way by memory. It was halfway down the hall when her body failed. There was no warning, no sudden pain, no scream, just the sensation that the floor had disappeared. Alzira tried to grab the wall, but the strength didn't come. She fell sideways, her hip hitting the floor with a dull sound, muffled by the old rug. She stayed there. She tried to move, but her body didn't respond. Her breathing became short and uneven. Her voice wouldn't come out. The phone was too far away. The door was locked. The clock in the living room kept marking time, indifferent, each second heavier than the last. Bartow appeared at the end of the hallway. He observed the scene for a few seconds. The motionless body, the strange smell in the air, the irregular breathing, the silence broken only by rain and the ticking clock. He approached slowly, sniffed Alzira's face, touched her cold hand with his paw. Then he meowed. It was loud, sharp, echoing through the empty apartment, a sound that didn't match that quiet cat. He meowed again and again, each time louder. No one answered. Bartow stopped, looked around, walked to the door, came back, climbed the shelf, jumped down, meowed once more, this time almost a scream. Then something changed. As if he had made a decision, Bartow ran to the kitchen window, jumped onto the outer ledge, ignored the rain, and leapt onto the neighboring building's balcony. He didn't look back. Alzira didn't see it. But if she could have, she would have understood that in that moment someone had chosen not to abandon her. The rain made everything slippery. Bartow moved across balconies as if he felt no cold, no fear, no doubt. He jumped over railings, past toppled flower pots, balanced on narrow ledges with the precision of someone who had done this before, or needed to do it now. In the next apartment, the lights were still on. A young man sat at a table, surrounded by papers and screens. The sound of the rain drowned out almost everything, but not the noise of the cat entering through the open window. Bartow landed with a dull thud. The young man, startled, jumped up and tried to shoo him away. Bartow didn't run. He walked toward him, meowing loudly, insistently, too urgent to ignore. The man tried to grab him. Bartow dodged and ran back to the window, looking over his shoulder as if calling him. The man closed the window. Bartow meowed even louder, scratched the glass, jumped onto the table, knocked papers over, climbed onto the chair, meowed again, now staring directly into the man's eyes. Something was wrong. That much was clear. Annoyed, confused and curious all at once, the man opened the window. Bartow stepped out, stopped on the ledge, and looked back. Waited. The man sighed, grabbed a jacket, and followed the cat across the balcony, crossing into the neighboring building under the light rain. Bartow led the way without hesitation, jumping back into Alzira's apartment. The door was locked. The silence was heavy. The man called out. No answer. He called building security. Minutes later, the door was forced open. Alzira was found in the hallway, conscious but weak. Help arrived quickly after that. As the paramedics worked, Bartow watched from a distance, sitting still, tail wrapped around his body. No one noticed when he slipped away, but as Alzira was taken out of the building under the rain that had finally begun to ease, something inside her seemed to know she was not alone. The hospital had a different kind of silence from Alzira's home. It wasn't empty, it was suspended. The smell of disinfectant, careful footsteps, low voices. She stayed there for a few days, long enough to understand that her body no longer obeyed the way it used to, and that the fall could have ended very differently. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the dark hallway, the rain, the clock marking time. and she thought of the cat. She asked about him a few times. No one knew. They said he must have run away, like cats usually do. Alzira nodded, but didn't believe it. Barto didn't run away, he decided. When she finally returned home, the apartment felt bigger, colder, quieter. She walked slowly to the armchair, sat down and set her bag on the floor, looked around, waiting for a movement, a familiar sound. Nothing. She took a deep breath and spoke softly, not knowing why. "Thank you, wherever you are." That was when she heard a noise coming from the bedroom. Something gentle, a faint scratching. Alzira stood carefully and opened the closet door. Barto was there, curled up between old boxes, holding in his mouth a small coat button, the same one she had lost decades earlier and never found again. He stepped out slowly, jumped down, and without ceremony climbed onto her lap. The purring began, low, steady, firm. Alzira cried silently, her trembling hand resting on his grey fur. She didn't try to understand, she simply accepted. From that day on, Barto never slept far from her, and Alzira stopped saying she liked living alone. Because some lives aren't saved with words or strength. Sometimes they're saved by an insistent meow on the right night. After that day, neighbors began noticing small, strange things. Barto never left the building again, never crossed the street, never wandered far. He was always nearby, sitting on the same bench in the inner courtyard, watching Alzira walk slowly, now more carefully, but with something new in her expression. She began talking to him, as if he were human, telling stories from the past, complaining about hospital food, laughing alone at memories no one else knew. Barto listened in silence, his good eye always attentive, as if storing everything away. One morning, the caregiver who came twice a week asked, "Do you really believe that cat saved your life?" Alzira thought for a few seconds, looked at Barto asleep on the rug, peaceful, whole. "No," she said. "I think he just reminded me I still had one." That same week, Barto began aging quickly, slept more, walked less. One day, he simply didn't wake up. Alzira found him in his usual place, at peace. She sat beside him and stayed there for hours. She didn't scream, didn't call anyone. She just stayed. That night, for the first time since the fall, the apartment was completely silent. No purring, no soft footsteps, nothing. But Alzira slept well. Because some presences never leave. They just change places. And for the rest of her life, whenever it rained at night, Alzira swore she could hear, mixed with the sound of water, a distant meow, as if someone was still there, watching over her.